This is Chris Ramirez with Inside the Mind of a Veteran. Today I want to talk about PTSD and how it is portrayed in the media. If everybody doesn't know, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it is not exclusive only to the military. It can happen to anybody who's been in a bad car accident. It can result from any traumatic experience. It is generally identified as being something military or veterans suffer from more than the rest of the populace. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily that designation is going to necessarily mean somebody's going to fly off the handle, become the crazed veteran, as we've been portrayed in the media. Movies like Rambo they featured his military training, but also his reaction to outside stimuli and how his response was. There's TV shows about law enforcement that are on a regular basis that feature PTSD in their stories, and generally it is portrayed as basically as a veteran snapping or in the middle of a flashback attacking somebody. And I was curious about this, so I actually looked and did some quick research. And the VA took a bunch of different sources and did a epidemiological study of PTSD. And what they found is, in the Vietnam era veterans, in the mid-1980s, 33% of people with PTSD reported having some kind of intimate partner violence, slapping, pushing, and escalating beyond that. While 13.5% of the veterans without PTSD reported the same issues. Now we come forward to post 9/11, and the average is 7.5% to 8.6% of people without PTSD or veterans without PTSD have some kind of violent issue, or they've been identified as having violent outbreaks, yelling at somebody, breaking things, the sort. And with PTSD, 19.5% has been identified as having violent issues, which is the same thing. Same thing as I mentioned, throwing things, punching holes in walls, stuff like that. But the next line in this, or like one or two lines after that, so when substance abuse and alcohol abuse were managed, and anger issues were addressed, the amount of violence was not statistically tracked because it was so low. So what this says to me is that, yes, there has been a precedent for these violent portrayals, but realistically, these portrayals have given the impression that anyone who meets a veteran with PTSD should be ready to run, because you're going to be a crazed veteran, they're going to snap, which isn't really the truth. I've worked in actually some really stressful places with helping other veterans. I worked as a work study within a local community college in the Bay Area, and then UC Santa Cruz, and then I also worked as an interim program coordinator for the veterans program at UC Santa Cruz. And the majority of the time, veterans just want to do their own thing, just like everybody else. Yeah, there might be something that happens that angers them or triggers just a momentary, a physical reflex. And out of most of the people that I have spoken with, and people who are in the same generation I am, the post 9/11 combat veterans, we've all seen it where it's, you tell somebody, oh, I served in Afghanistan or Iraq, and you can physically watch people, back up a little bit, like they're expecting something to happen. And it's really not the case. Yes, we have we have bad days where we're angry. Who doesn't? You know, one of the guys a friend of mine named Dan, big guy, lifts weights, can look scary because he's all tatted up. And people would kind of give him a wide berth until they got to know him. He's like the goofiest guy you'll ever meet. But because of that portrayal, when he identifies as a veteran, people start making those connections. And there are some shows that do a really good job about it. They portray the struggles, the issues. There definitely been a couple shows that have dealt with even law enforcement issues of dealing with veterans and PTSD, and addressing not only the difficulties that we face as veterans, but dealing with the VA system itself. And it's not an easy system to go through. It is a government-run medical health system designed to treat a very certain group of the population with a variety of injuries and illnesses that is not typical to the rest of the populace. And by what I mean by that is 1% currently is what is being tracked. 1% of the population is the percentage of people who enlist or become commissioned in the military out of the population. So there's not a large percentage of people in that group. But if you look at that group as a whole, and especially in the post 9/11 era where guys are surviving injuries they wouldn't have survived 20, 30 years ago, you see people with amputations, brain injuries, things that people who would probably never made it off the battlefield in Vietnam, Korea, and now they're being saved and they're being helped to have a normal life, or as normal a life as they can. And with their challenges and difficulties, you see there are a lot of people who make strides. It's not something you see in the regular television. Guys who were in firefights or in city battles, issues like that, or places dealing with things like that. You don't really see the portrayal of that. You see the flashbacks, you see the violent outbursts. And I understand for TV and for movies, it makes good drama. But the realistic thing is that it portrays veterans with PTSD, and in that portrayal, that is a common association with people. It's not something that people typically deal with in their regular days for the most part. So they go, by just reaction as people, we go to what we have known and have seen. And if you have not done research, you've not worked with veterans, your background material is nothing more than television shows and movies. And with that in mind, that frame of reference, most people are going to be kind of leery, worried, because the veterans are portrayed as, we're one bad day away from snapping, which is, in some cases, it is the truth. In other cases, it's so far from the truth, it's not even measurable. And a lot of the guys who are having issues with these, dealing with PTSD and building up, usually their issues aren't exploded out on other people. It's internal. I mean, this is where the 22 a day comes from. We have 22 veterans a day committing suicide. And this isn't just the post 9/11. This goes back to Vietnam, and people with those people who fought from mostly Vietnam forward, because a lot of the Korean and World War II veterans are they're pretty advanced in age, and there's not a lot of statistical tracking of them from what I know. What I have read about the suicides, things like that with PTSD, is it's mostly Vietnam era veterans and forward. So, there are shows that do address that. Absolutely, they're great. It brings spotlight onto a difficult subject to discuss. But the flip side of that is when you have a show, a drama, where they're talking about, oh, he killed somebody because he had a flashback. Or, this person shot up a building because, something reminded them or they snapped. PTSD, being what it is just a reaction to traumatic experiences. With that in mind, people, it's not something that goes away. It's not something that can be 100% managed by medication. And the last statistics I saw is 1 in 5 people returning from overseas are diagnosed with PTSD. More often than not, from my experiences personally, people with PTSD, they just want to be left alone. They want to go stay off on their own. And it's not so much, being scared of people. It just becomes easier to do that, to deal with the issues that are part of it. Going to amusement parks that are, long lines of people, it's a stressful situation for most people. If you've ever seen a parent take a kid to an amusement park and they're waiting in line, kid gets upset, parent gets upset, but they make it through it. And a veteran with PTSD, there's anxiety there. You feel kind of hemmed in, trapped. And without a way to focus that and think about, where you are, ground yourself in the moment, it's really difficult to manage. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to start swinging and pushing and getting people out of my way. Usually, in my case, if I was feeling overwhelmed like that, I do what I need to safely remove myself from that situation. Whether it be just sitting down with my back to the ground or back to the wall, grounding or focusing on my service dog, or just stepping over rails or whatever and getting out of the line. So yeah, it's a stressful situation for me, but it's manageable. I have tools that I've learned. That's something they can't really show in a television drama because it's not thrilling. It doesn't bring up the storyline. It's more of a portrayal of long-term recovery, and that's just not something they're looking at. And with that, it's not an easy subject to talk about in the first place because nobody really wants to go in asking about, oh, what's your PTSD? How are you involved? Like, how does it impact you? Stuff like that, because it's not an easy topic to talk about. You get a lot of guys who are coming back from overseas. Some of them have PTSD issues, or they're just having readjustment issues. They can't tell, but this is something they don't want to talk about. You can't reveal stuff like that while you're in the military because you're seen as weak, and being weak is bad. So with that mindset, it's suck it up and just keep going. So when people get out, they have to find a way to manage this, and that's TV. The TV shows and media is showing that the absolute worst case of this situation, where someone hasn't gotten help, they haven't talked to anybody about these issues. Even if it's just writing something down on a piece of paper, journaling, they haven't taken hold of these yet. And when that happens, there are people who they self-medicate, they drink, they find other forms to help manage these symptoms, but in reality, they are more problematic. And that's what the media shows. There are shows on Netflix right now that they're built around characters' experiences in violent situations and how they're responding. Marvel Comics has made characters based completely on veterans of PTSD, and they're violent portrayals. But you also don't see in these shows, and there's one that they do address it on one show in particular, where somebody is going through the process of talking with other people, just listening, going to groups, whatever. But for the most part, the storyline is driven by their experiences in violent situations and how they manage it, or how they project that onto other people as part of the storyline. And while these do make up, they are good stories, and they bring focus onto these issues if taken at more than just surface value. The problem is that is the immediate image that snaps in the head when somebody hears about you're a combat veteran of PTSD. So we're going to take a little break now, and we'll be back in a few more minutes talking about PTSD portrayal in the media.
At the time you were arrested, you were served with a DS-367 temporary driver's license. It's good for 30 days, but if you don't act within 10 days, at the end of those 30 days, your license will be suspended. It's important for your lawyer to contact the DMV for you. Set up a driver's license administrative hearing so that your license is not going to suspension. That's something here at Bramer Law we do for you.
I choose Patriot Bail Bonds.
We choose Patriot Bail Bonds.
We choose Patriot Bail Bonds.
If the best criminal attorneys choose Patriot Bail Bonds, who would you choose?
Patriot Bail Bonds. We fight for your freedom.
Patriot Bail Bonds has the best customer service in Bakersfield. Patriot has more 5-star ratings than any bail company in Kern County. Plus, we're fast and affordable. If you run into the law, make Patriot Bail Bonds your first call. That's right, one call, that's all.
If you're in jail, call Patriot Bail.
Talking about PTSD in the media, and I actually talked to a bunch of friends of mine about this, and kind of polled them, and one of the guys, he responded by saying that PTSD is always shown to somebody losing it, going out, they're back on a battlefield, and they're in their mind they're there, but physically their reactions to other people around them are based in that mental area, being mentally in another place. But there's a lot more to it. There's so many more things that go into how PTSD is dealt with, how it's projected, and even in the cases where it does result in some kind of violent backlash, it's usually something that triggers the event. But that's not the whole thing. It's not something that just happens out of the blue. It's it's a situation that has been building up, and it's a pressurized jar boiling, coming to a point where it's about to explode. And that one last degree of temperature is all you need to set it past that catastrophic point. And it's the same thing with anybody else. You look at the violence in the news. You start looking at these people who are part of the mass shootings, and they're at their point of violence, they had things going on. They had, most of the time, that they have mental illnesses or some kind of situation like that. But to get to that point where they violently react to the world around them, it isn't just a one-time thing. These people have built up to this point. And with PTSD in general, or not in general, but with combat veterans, in my experience, is not the case. I've been harassed while I was in school. People trying to provoke a reaction. And there have been times that I have not reacted properly. I've used profanities, I've raised my voice. And in the moment, it's something that happens, but I do realize that it was wrong. And at one point when I was working on my bachelor's degree, I actually had to be talked to about an outburst that I had on campus. And it was in response to someone wearing a anti-flag shirt. Shirt in itself doesn't mean that gives me license to, explode on somebody. With that in mind, though, wearing a provocative subject matter t-shirt, you're gonna get reactions from people. It may vary from, hey, that's not right, to verbal blow-ups like I had, but you can't expect to basically to poke the sleeping bear and not get a response. And that's what the movies and TV shows generally don't depict. That somebody with PTSD, they're not any more likely. There's statistical evidence that they are actually far less likely to commit violence than expected. When you're looking at less than 20% of the 20% that are being diagnosed, that's a very small number. And I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but for a TV show writer or a movie writer to incorporate that and to chalk it up to being a PTSD issue, you're doing a disservice to the people who suffer with these issues and are trying to manage their daily life. And it could be something like, for me to manage my situation, I avoid certain movies. I avoid TV shows until I talk to a couple people and find out, hey, what, this is actually really good, or it's got some scenes that might bother you, but you can always pause it and take a breath. That doesn't mean I'm gonna snap or go off. I realize that those shows and movies that portray certain events that are related to my service bring up heightened emotions that I have to deal with. And instead of having to fight through that, I would rather avoid shows and movies about conflicts in certain areas of the world that are similar to what I dealt with. And because of that, I know I've missed out on some very interesting shows and dramas that were showing these situations that are happening. But at the same time, when people shows as a reference with no context, they're only getting part of the story. And the same thing is, watching an action movie about a guy running through the woods and holding off the police because he has PTSD and is a veteran. There's more to it than that. It's something you have to just get to know somebody. Is basically what it is. It's the same thing we're all told: don't judge a book by its cover. Just because that cover says PTSD on it, that doesn't mean that the end result is going to be a violent, bloody, story that occurs. more often than not, getting to know people that have these issues, or that are, sometimes they're struggling, sometimes they're going through life, not without a care, but they seem to be projecting that. Even when they're projecting that, doesn't mean that they're not having a bad day. They're just trying to put one foot in front of the other and keep going and putting a brave face on for the world. So instead of the media portraying violence, it could portray that, but the truth is, that's not going to make good TV. There are movies out there that completely just bring comedy to that situation. And there are actually lots of veteran-run sites and media groups that they make entertainment with this stuff in mind, mocking these situations, because it's mainly catering to that veteran group who's been there. They've seen it, they've done it, and they can relate. But at the same time, they're doing it in a way that yes, these issues happen, but they're making light of it. Or, one of my favorite ones is the zombie apocalypse, and how every military guy thinks they're super excited and ready for it. It becomes a big joke. But that was the intent of the movie, to make it a big joke. So there is a way to show these scenes, show these issues, even with the background material of, PTSD and going through life dealing with that. But they can show it in a humorous way. It's been done well. And instead of having it always be the catalyst for violence, and maybe more media can incorporate it as this is what people are going through, but this is how they're doing it. I understand it doesn't sell. It's not a big popular money item. But even with that in mind, it does help start the conversations. And that's what a lot of this stuff is about. Start talking to people about this. If you're a veteran and you're watching, talk to a friend. You don't have to ask them, hey, are you having flashbacks? Are you having a bad day? Well, the bad day part. But, just ask, hey, how's it going? Do you want to go out and grab a beer, or go out and just hang out and chill? And most of the times, if something's bothering somebody in a situation like that, it'll come out in the conversation if they want to talk about it. But sometimes they just want somebody to, hey, thanks for just hanging out. Thanks for just getting me out of that funk. And like I said a couple times, I have a group of friends that I chat with all the time. And it's all about that. It's keeping in touch with each other. It's, making fun of each other. But at the same time, we're getting each other involved. Sometimes we're just talking about, hey, what's going on in our lives. Sometimes we're talking about, you remember what this bonehead did while we were in, and how stupid it was. We'll laugh and we'll have a good time about it. But the point is, it starts a conversation. You're not alone. You're not, there is people out there, or there are people out there in the world who are concerned about you, who, want to touch base with you and just make sure that everything's okay. So again, that's not something you see a lot of in the military or in the movies, TV shows. There are some that do address it, some that have fun with it. But for the most part, the default response is some kind of violent incident involved with a veteran that has PTSD in storylines. And while it is a reality, it is based in some fact. There are statistical numbers that show there were violence. These numbers, they've gone down by a lot. And when they're managed, when the issues that accompany the PTSD, substance abuse, self-medication, are managed, these numbers unbelievably small. They're infinitesimal. And with that in mind, you don't see that portrayed. You don't see, you'll see drug addicts portrayed as recovering and turning around their lives. You'll see criminals as part of a storyline that have rehabilitated themselves. But you don't see the guy who saw 4 or 5 tours in different places, came back and had some trouble, and then now they're moving forward trying to get on with their life and change what was going wrong or what they were doing wrong. And because of that, all we see is the violence. We don't even see the after effect if there is violence involved, where somebody goes, oh damn, I just lost it, and the legal repercussions, all that. But how, if they're turning their lives around, how they're trying to get through their day to day. You never see that part. Even the shows that do show some of the aspects, talking, group therapy, whatever, they still show elements of violence, somebody reacting violently to the world because of a situation they feel out of control. And because of that, and because of the fact that our all-volunteer military force is such a small group of the population, there are people in this world who haven't ever met a veteran who has combat service. Or even, there's some places that haven't even met a veteran, really. And we come from all different walks of life, but the truth of the matter is, if you're only looking at 1% of the population, that's a small number. And out of that, it is statistically about 1% of the military is actively deployed to combat zones. There are times when it seems much larger, and with the rotation of troops, it really does seem like it's a much bigger number. But in looking at the overall, it's a pretty small percentage of people who are deployed and see actual combat service. And they can be deployed in a forward area where there is, hostile problems, and that does impact you. That can cause PTSD, that long-term being on heightened alert, and having to be in a situation where you might have to respond with lethal force to save your own life and the lives of others around you. That does take a toll. But with that, there's only a small amount of the populace that has combat-related PTSD. There are lots of people who have it from accidents, from fires, from personal tragedies, sexual trauma, whatever. That these people they're struggling, and it's no less important than dealing with a veteran with PTSD. But for sake of clarity, that's what I'm focusing on, is combat veterans with PTSD. And the biggest thing is, out of the people I've talked to personally, is that we don't like the way we're portrayed in the media. We don't like being portrayed as the guy who's going to snap because somebody dropped a plate, or fireworks went off around them, or they were pushed. We're just people trying to get along with our days, and if we're always portrayed as the violent person, how hard do you think that's going to be? People as a whole need to understand that just because a character is personified that way, that's not necessarily the norm. And because of that, by following through with that, you'll understand that you can just talk to you can talk to veterans with PTSD. Don't judge each other about appearances, about what you hear. Talk to a person, find out who they are, what they're about. And if they're a knucklehead, then you can judge them on being a knucklehead. But at the same time, just because you hear, I have PTSD, and I'm a combat veteran, doesn't mean that I'm going to go find my nearest tall structure and camp out up there and take my frustrations out in the world. I may shoot my kid with Nerf guns, but that's a whole different situation. So we're going to wrap it up, and we'll see you next time with Inside the Mind of a Veteran.